Welcome, everyone, to a special Cops and Writers podcast. Today is going to be different. We're going to attempt to help you understand the two assassination attempts on President Donald Trump from the lens of law enforcement. But first, let me introduce my esteemed colleague who has agreed to join me on the show today, Peter Forcelli. I called for backup, and I was lucky enough to get retired ATF Deputy Assistant Director Peter Forcelli. Peter was on the show back in January talking about government cover-up and corruption surrounding Operation Fast and Furious. Peter has testified before Congress and was considered a whistleblower for doing the right thing. Pete, thanks for being on the show today.
Honored to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Anything you'd like to add to that impressive resume, sir?
No, it's like I said, just good to be here. Yeah, had a good career, but it's over now, and now I get to talk freely and speak my mind without having to look over my shoulder.
Yeah, me too. I don't have to worry about internal affairs going through my stuff. So it's a nice feeling, that's for sure. So, in a historical event on July 15th in Butler, Pennsylvania, President Donald Trump was shot in an assassination attempt. It should be noted that the former fire chief, Corey Compertor, was fatally shot while shielding his family. Truly a hero, I tell you. Two others were shot but lived. The gunmen, who I don't like to give the names of gunmen because to me they're like subhuman. I have no respect for them whatsoever, and I don't want to glorify him. But he was a 20-year-old with little training or any training, was armed with an AR platform rifle with a scope. He was on the roof of a shed 130 yards away from the former president. So he had a position of advantage. He had the height, he had a clear shot straight through, and he was eventually shot and killed by Secret Service counter snipers after he got off rounds striking the former president's ear. We will discuss this in depth later in the show. And also, September 16th at Trump International Golf Course, a subject armed with an AK-47 with a scope. And he also had two ceramic plates in backpacks that he put up like on a fence. And it was funny because the press is like, I wonder what these are. I'm like, well, that's cover. Handgun rounds are going to be stopped by that. Rifle rounds, probably not, but handgun rounds, that will stop that. So he was in it for the long haul, it looked like, and a GoPro and food. So he was laying in wait for about 12 hours, and he was about 400 or 500 yards away in what the FBI are calling an assassination attempt. The Secret Service fired at the gunman and missed, and he got away. But he was captured later on by local law enforcement. There has been an absence of airtime with this one. I mean, it happened and then poof, it was kind of like gone, don't you think, Pete?
Yeah, I mean, you don't hear much about it. And we're going back to the second shooting. This might not be an arrest. This could have been a manhunt. It was for the vigilance of some woman who saw him running out of the bushes and
That's
realized,
right,
hey,
yeah.
this guy might have done something shady, and started to photograph his license plate and then transmitted that license plate to the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, who then obviously put it out to other agencies as well. But had that lady not seen what she's seen and had the presence of mind to take that photo and pass it on, this person could have gotten away, and we'd be looking for, someone. I'm sure he probably would have been caught, but you never know how long it would have taken. But yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of factors that fell into place for him to actually wind up in custody.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But that's police work, right? I mean, a lot of times we just rely on the public. It's a team sport. We
Yeah,
do need the public to help us out, and many times that's how it works. But
right.
the would-be shooter was an older guy who seems, well, lack of better words, crazy. He seems nuts. And if you ever see pictures of this guy, you're like, this guy seems like a nutcase.
Well, right after the shooting, I happened to have ability to go into his Facebook and Twitter page before they were taken down.
Yeah,
The stuff that was posted there was so over the top that you could never convince me in 100 years that he was not on the radar of the FBI, the CIA, and Homeland Security investigations. Because he was posting openly that he was recruiting soldiers from the United States, people who were willing to go fight, and people from other parts of the world, to include Afghanistan, to to go to the Ukraine to fight for
Yes.
Ukraine. He
Yeah,
was
he's
asking
like,
for passport information. So I mean, the stuff that he was posting, and it wasn't just one or two posts. This was a continual effort to recruit people. Um, Absolutely should have gotten the attention of someone. And I know that law enforcement searches social media, look using
oh
keyword
yeah,
searches. So I
absolutely.
mean, this person should have been on somebody's radar for quite some time, and that's as big a dropping of a ball as anything else that happened in the second event, in my opinion.
Wow, that's interesting. I did not know that. I knew he was, I mean, all you had to do is take a pic, see him and you're like, okay, being a cop for 25 years is like he's got the crazy eyes, he's got the crazy look, it's like it's very obvious.
Yeah.
And he wanted to go to Ukraine to become a freedom fighter, now this. I'm not going to go too deep into it because, it's because of its recent nature, lack of press coverage, and just lack of information on it, really. I mean, I, yeah, I'm just going to focus on the other attempt for now. So that's where we're going to go. So without getting too political, the hate for this former president by a very biased media shine through like a laser with, both events actually, and especially the first. The press wouldn't call it an assassination attempt for quite some time. The guy got shot, plain and simple. It's like I was watching it, and a buddy of mine that I was partners with, he's like, "Yeah, you could hear the comms. It's like, shoot her down and all this." It was like, "Yeah, he got shot," and the news commentators are like, well, maybe he didn't get shot. It could have, a bullet could have ricocheted off of the teleprompter. They're making up excuses. They just didn't want to say that, yeah, former President Trump literally came within an inch or two of having his head completely blown off.
There are other news organizations where some of their talking heads have actually alleged that this was all set up by former President Trump,
God.
to help, rally support. So, I mean, the stuff that's coming out of the mouths of the media is
Yeah.
frankly appalling. And then even, I think it was within the last day or two, the Secretary of Commerce, and her name escapes me, said that Trump needs to be eliminated. So, I mean, the
That's,
rhetoric that's coming out of the mouths of some of
yeah.
our elected officials is certainly vitriolic and dangerous,
Yeah.
and it's just not what we would expect from leaders. I mean, because they are our elected
Right.
leaders, but it would be nice to see them exhibit some leadership.
And we're going to talk about that. And I think it comes from this culture of keyboard warriors where, it's like, you know what, I don't like you, Pete. I'm going to call you all kinds of names on Facebook or so, whatever social media and, blah, blah, blah. But, I'm 1,000 miles away from you. There's no chance of, getting in your face or you punching my lights out or anything like that. And that's kind of the culture that we've become. And it's super sad and it's ridiculous. But let
Yeah.
me make it clear that I don't want to see anybody get shot, no matter what side of the aisle they're on. If the tables were turned and if it was Biden or Harris, they'd be naming high schools after them for getting shot in the ear. Are you kidding me? I'll make it very clear that I'm not the biggest fan of any of these politicians, but the truth is the truth. A sitting president calling for a bullseye on Trump, a threat to democracy. What do we do with threats to democracy? We eliminate them.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know, that
they also equate him to Hitler all the time.
Oh, exactly. I'm sorry, but sorry, President Biden, but he needs to choose his words more wisely because you have people who are mentally ill that are on the fringe and they're going to take it as like a rally call. It's like, well, of course, yeah, I've got to do this. Democracy is going to end tomorrow if I don't do it. So he's got to pick his words more wisely or get his miracle ear reprogrammed. Either one, he's got to do this. So
Right.
I wanted to weigh in and do this podcast, but I wanted to wait until all the facts came in. But I'll probably be scattered in the ocean when and if that ever happens. So I'm going to go a little bit about myself and why I think I could put my 2 cents worth in this conversation. I'm not or was never a Secret Service agent. I'm not a SWAT operator. I did go through an abbreviated version of SWAT school when I was a sergeant in an anti-gang squad and have gone after numerous bad guys hiding in bushes, dark basement, dark houses, including, warehouses, you name it. Yeah, I've been involved in those searches. And that doesn't make me unique in any kind of way. That's what street cops do in any, like, especially bigger cities. I get a kick out of, it's like, You hear these guns, it's like, in 25 years, I never pulled my gun. Were you working in Mayberry? I mean, my first, I think it was my first or second day, I caught a homicide suspect running at me with a knife. Of course, I pulled my gun. I was ready to, and I'm like, holy shit, I'm gonna have to shoot this guy. He just killed somebody and he's literally running at me. I'm like, wow, that doesn't happen every day, but yeah, so that's that. And unfortunately, the internet was just filled with sniper experts all of a sudden, after this happened, and it became laughable. I do know the difference between a federal agent that has had some street experience or that's a bookworm. And we'll get back to that. We'll get back to nothing can replace good old meat and potatoes police work. And federal agents don't do a lot of that, but when they do, it's super important and more specific, the Secret Service. We'll get into, how you can become complacent, how it can be a super boring job until it isn't. So we'll get back to that. But I know a little bit more about this stuff than the average bearer. I've worked presidential visits and have augmented dignitary protection units, and I've worked with numerous federal agencies, including the Secret Service, in various roles. Let's look at a little bit of history. I want to talk about modern assassinations and attempts on presidents or those who were running for president. In 1912, former President Teddy Roosevelt was president from 1901 to 1909. He was campaigning in Milwaukee, my city. He was shot one time in the chest before giving his speech. A stenographer put the shooter in a half Nelson and managed to grab the pistol. The bullet lodged in a rib close to his heart, but he still gave his speech. The bullet went through a heavy coat, thick eyeglass case and pages of his notes, and that saved his life. The shooter was an unemployed saloon keeper, and he stood trial and he was found criminally insane and spent the rest of his days in an insane asylum in Wisconsin. November 12th, 1963, John F. Kennedy, the 35th president of the United States, was assassinated while riding in his presidential motorcade through Daley Plaza in Texas. I won't get into all of that, except that it should be noted that Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit was shot and killed by Lee Harvey Oswald with a revolver moments after the assassination in the investigation. Of course, there's all kinds of conspiracy theories. Again, that could be a whole nother show. June 5th, 1968, Robert Bobby Kennedy was shot by a 22 caliber pistol by Sirhan Sirhan at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. He was well on his way to becoming the Democratic nominee for president. Sirhan Sirhan stated he shot Kennedy because of his pro-Israeli stance. Yeah, Kennedy died the next day. He had no Secret Service protection per their protocol back then. After that assassination, that had changed. May 15, 1972, presidential candidate George Wallace was shot 4 times by a loner from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, using, damn Milwaukee, using a 38 caliber revolver while campaigning at Laurel Shopping Center in Maryland. It left him paralyzed and in constant pain. Captain E.C. Dothard of the Alabama State Patrol was shot in the chest and he survived. And Secret Service agent Nicholas Zorvas was shot in the throat and he lived. He survived. President Gerald Ford had a bad September in 1972, especially with the ladies. The first attempt on his life was September 5th, 1975. Charles Manson follower Lynette Squeaky Fromm got within feet of the president, produced and pointed a loaded Colt 1911 model 45 caliber pistol, squeezing the trigger several times. The gun didn't discharge because she didn't chamber around. Secret Service agent Larry Buford grabbed the gun and pushed Fromm to the ground, placing her into custody. Not too long after that, September 22nd, 1975, Sarah Jane Moore fired 2 rounds from her 38 special revolver at President Ford from about 40 feet away. The first shot missed his head by 5 inches. The second round struck a taxi driver, poor guy, but he survived. Someone in the crowd grabbed the gun, and local law enforcement wrestled her to the ground before she could shoot again. Presidential Secret Service team pushed Ford into the waiting limo, where the Secret Service and Donald Rumsfeld lay on top of him. So, on March 30th, 1981, then President of the United States, Ronald Reagan was shot and wounded by John Hinckley Jr. in Washington, D.C. He was hit in the left underarm, breaking a rib, puncturing a lung, and causing serious internal bleeding. When he arrived at the hospital, he was near death. They stabilized him in the ER and he underwent emergency surgery, saving him. White House Press Secretary James Brady, Secret Service agent Tim McCarthy, and DC police officer Thomas Delaney were also wounded. All three survived, but Brady had brain damage and was permanently disabled. His death in 2014 was considered a homicide because it was ultimately caused by these injuries. Hinckley stated he shot Reagan to impress actress Jodie Foster, who he was infatuated with. Obviously, he didn't know Jodie very well. Hinckley was found not guilty by reason of insanity and was released from a mental institution in 2017. So a little bit about, RFK, no Secret Service protection with his family history. I mean, come on, that he had to hire his own, security after this the first Trump attempt of assassination. They did give him Secret Service protection. And then when he more or less dropped out of the race, they took it away from him, which is protocol. And I understand that. But again, with his family history, I I don't understand that. I really don't. So let's talk about what went wrong with the attempt on President Trump's life. So there is a difference between protection for a former president or a candidate and a sitting president, vice president. There are different levels and equipment. I'm privy to some of that, and I don't want to give out trade secrets or anything like that. How about you, Pete?
Yeah, I'm familiar with Secret Service and their protective measures that they use. And I know for a fact that, there were a lot of balls dropped here, so to speak. And look, there's a lot of obfuscation once this thing happened, like, in the congressional investigation. I'll go as far as to say that Director Cheadle's testimony was perhaps the worst congressional testimony I've seen when it came to taking ownership of a mistake, perhaps even surpassing some of the stuff that was said during the Fast and Furious investigation that I spoke out on. But yeah, it's troubling, and the taxpayers certainly expect more.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, we'll get into that a little bit later, but I just wanted to let people know that there isn't going to be a full contingency of Secret Service agents and the equipment for a former president compared to a sitting president or vice president for that matter. I mean, if you're a former, like, okay, President Clinton, he has a contingency of Secret Service agents. It's not even close to the same as what President Biden has as a sitting president, and
Right.
nor should it be. But the flip side of the coin is they have to do a threat evaluation. That's part of their job for, any kind of for the president, themselves and what the circumstances are. And I tell you what, nobody, I can't think of a president that has elicited so much emotion in both directions than Trump.
No, absolutely. And look, when you talk about former presidents, does Jimmy Carter require the same amount of
Yeah,
protection as Donald Trump, who has contracts on his head from Iran, and who is the constant subject of vitriolic speaking from our elected officials here and from the media? And they like to use the term dog whistle when they talk about certain things that Trump says that are dog whistles to the white supremacists. Yet the stuff that they say is so much more apparent and so much more blatant. I would argue that some of the stuff they say should be considered a dog whistle to some of the people on the hard left that might not be that stable and might do something like what we saw in Butler or down there on the golf course.
right. And that's the issue. Again, you're using these big tough guy, words and all this rhetoric. And what they're not understanding, or maybe they do, maybe I'm just cutting them too much slack, that again, there are people out there that are not mentally balanced that are going to see this as a quest of some kind or holy thing that they have to do. And, that's horrible. That's not being a responsible leader. But, anyways, okay, poor communication between the locals and the Secret Service. Yeah, that goes without saying. There's videos of the local police engaging or not engaging the shooter. You know, I'll pick that apart in two different ways. First, I'll talk about the communication. It doesn't have to be super fancy. What I would do is if we had an outside agency on an operation with us, either one of my guys is going to sit next to one of their guys. And with, there has to be separate communication between the two. They're on different channels, different radios, whatever. But if I say, hey, Pete, there's a guy on the roof, 130 yards pointing a rifle at the president, you can get on your radio and say, hey, guess what? There's a bad guy, 130 yards, southwest of, the protectee's location, do something about this, and again, it can be that simple. It doesn't have to be anything like super secret squirrel, whatever. And there are contingencies for all this, and I don't know why they didn't do that.
Well, I would go a little bit further than that.
Okay.
Because I ran a field division. I ran the Miami field division, which meant I had to work with my state and local partners all the time. And on some larger operations, we could have 10, 15 different police departments participating if we had defendants in various parts of our geographical area of responsibility.
Yeah.
When we would have these large scale operations, we would have a briefing and everybody attended that briefing. So you're
Right,
communicating
absolutely, yes.
expectations in advance.
Yep.
We would at times have a Pelican cases full of radios, and we'd give the option. You could take one of our radios, or you can do like you just said. You can, if you have a radio when you're working with another partner, make sure you're sitting next to each other so we would have
Yep.
comms. We would then, at the end of the operation, have another briefing and talk about what were the results, make sure all the evidence was in order, and then discuss what went wrong. My understanding is in Butler, there were agencies that were never present to have a face-to-face conversation with Secret Service. So that's one problem. So the comms are bad there. Then to your point, there were people working on the same operation that had absolutely no ability to talk to each other. And from what I'm hearing, the command post was small and did not have comms that had the ability to communicate with all of the participating agencies there. So that's another thing. So I mean, the communication fell apart before there even was an operation, or before President Trump even took the stage. They had already failed to communicate from that point, well before the shooter began to do what he was doing.
Right. So, and one more, and we'll get back to comms, but also there is a video, and I was trying to find it, but I couldn't find it anymore. And that doesn't mean like conspiracy stuff or whatever. That's just YouTube. And there was a local cop that got pushed up to the roof, and he's like, holy shit, there's a guy with a rifle up there, and he shimmied back down instead of engaging this guy. And there's a video of him running to his squad, getting his long gun, and he's just fumbling around. Obviously, there's adrenaline and all that, but it was very, very obvious that this person didn't know what he was doing with this rifle. And he kept on shouting it out, but he never got on his radio saying, hey, this is what I've got. Maybe another officer did that was like right by him because he wasn't by himself. I hope that's the case, instead of them trying to, like John Wayne it. And it's like, well, I'll go get my shooting iron and, then I'll go back and engage this guy. And, why wouldn't you get on the air? That's the first thing you should do. And secondly, I wouldn't jump back down. You take an oath. What if this guy just started spraying the crowd? He already killed one person, injured more. What if he just kept on going? I couldn't live with myself as a cop, thinking to myself, it's like, okay, I took an oath. I raised my right hand. That means that, yeah, I might get seriously hurt or killed trying to defend complete strangers. But that's what we do. And I could not deal with that. And there isn't a whole lot of talk about it. And the video, it looked, he just looked pitiful. I'm just looking at this. And again, this is a small town. Probably the biggest problem they have to deal with is like a barking dog or teenage drinking, or, some kid smoking marijuana somewhere or whatever. It's just, it was sad. I don't know if you saw any of that video, Pete.
No, but I know that that officer was spoken to, and my understanding is both of his hands were occupied as he was trying to get on that roof. And as he was trying to get on the roof, the muzzle of the rifle was pointed at him. So he did not have the ability to draw his weapon and defend himself. So I'm going to actually give him a pass on retreating. As far as the fumbling and all that stuff, I didn't see that because I never saw the video.
Yeah,
But
see,
I do know that he was interviewed.
okay.
And Yeah, that's why he did not engage, and he just didn't have his hands. He didn't have access to his hands because he hadn't fully pulled himself up onto the roof at that point.
But if he could have pulled himself on the roof or should have pulled himself on the roof, I'm just saying that, it's like that risk. And if I had a chance to take this guy out before he'd shoot innocent civilians, I would do it. But
Yeah.
you know that that's neither here nor there now. But yeah, I felt terrible. But the communications again was terrible between the locals, because you're going to have what the local PD, sheriffs, and probably highway patrol that are going to
Yeah.
be all involved in this.
And
And
they had plenty of time to get Trump off the stage. And actually, they had plenty of time in advance to tell him, hey, we're not letting you take the stage until we get this person who's been deemed suspicious identified or in custody or whatever. So, I mean, to your point, even before he had a chance to point that rifle at that officer, there were other opportunities to really put this thing to bed. And they failed in taking advantage of those opportunities.
yes. Now, the Secret Service counter snipers, I wanted to delve a little bit into that. They can't just start shooting at anyone who's a person of interest. I've heard so many times like, well, why didn't they shoot him? Why didn't they shoot him? Well, first you have to identify them as a threat, as a credible, immediate threat. It's not combat. They just can't start spraying. It's like, well, we think this guy might be whatever. It's like, no. What if it was a kid who wanted to get a better view of what was going on, or some just like regular civilian? We can't put the bullets back in the gun. There's no green light, red light. For the counter snipers. It's like no. If they identify an immediate threat, they have to take care of it. They have to neutralize it. But again, they have to make sure it's an immediate threat.
And my understanding is the shooters that actually did fire on him actually were obstructed by trees. So they had to identify him and what he was
Okay.
holding in his hand while looking
Right.
through foliage.
Oh
So,
God.
yeah. So in that regard, I have to give them props for that. Once
Yep.
they were able to get sights on target, they did their job at that point. But there were plenty of failures leading up to that point,
Yes.
that we're talking about.
Again, I have, all these sniper experts and, I'm not a sniper expert, but I do know those that were on our SWAT team, that were Army snipers, et cetera, that have saw like actual combat. And, the scope that, the optics that the Secret Service agents had, yeah, I mean, you could count the freckles on this person's face. I mean, that's high speed stuff, but they have to first identify that, yeah, he's holding a rifle and the barrel's coming our way. We got to take care of business. So, what happens to the agents, that were there, especially the ones that pulled the trigger? This is a homicide and the local DA has to like go through this case. And of course, it's justified, but it's still a justifiable homicide. And it was, how does that work with the Secret Service? Or do you have any idea?
Well, I can speak to how it works with ATF. Again, I was an agent. I was
Yeah,
on the tactical team. I was, later a manager and made my way up to the executive level. Um, the investigation is run by the state and locals, right?
right.
Unless, of course, an agent is shot or killed, and the FBI comes in and they'll investigate the incident as attempted murder or murder of a federal agent. So the county district attorney or county prosecutor, whatever they call themselves, their state attorneys, they'll run that investigation. Now they'll get supported by the inspections folks or internal affairs folks, whatever that unit is. I think it's
Yeah,
called
they call it
OC.
inspections, but it's internal affairs. Yeah.
Correct. So they'll help support, they'll help with the interviews, facilitating interviews with the Secret Service employees. But the final determination as to whether or not they're going to indict the agent actually falls with the county prosecutor. Now, I'm not saying that there's a need to indict anybody here. I'm just saying
Right.
that's how it works. It's kind of like when a local police officer gets involved in a shooting. The exception is, believe it or not, the FBI is the only entity that investigates their own shootings from top to
Yes.
bottom
Yep.
with no one else sticking their nose in it. And ironically, they've never had an agent that was deemed to have improperly shot and killed somebody in their entire history. So I actually like it better when there's a outside set of eyes looking at a shooting. Like what we did when ATF, where the county prosecutors ran it, we supported them. We provided the officers firearms to them. And it's funny, a little, I don't know if you're aware of this, most federal agencies, to include ATF, you are prohibited from turning your weapons over to state and local authorities until the
Oh,
special agent in charge of the field division can show up and deem that you're allowed to give that weapon over.
Wow, I did
So
not know
yeah,
that. I did not know
yeah,
that.
yeah. It's caused some tension over the years, but
I
yeah,
bet it has because
yeah,
I've been the incident commander for 7 officer involved shootings where an officer had to shoot and kill somebody. And, you know, one of the things that happens during this process is, they take their gun not in front of everybody because that it makes it look like you're guilty of something. But, you
right,
get a replacement gun later, but obviously it's going to be used for ballistic testing, et cetera. It's evidence. A
right.
homicide has occurred. Somebody has died.
Well, the big difference with federal agencies and local law enforcement is, like, an ATF agent does not have to speak to somebody that day. Other law enforcement, they give them 48 hours. And the belief is, and there's scientific studies that say in 48 hours, by that time, you will remember things that you might
Yes.
not remember immediately after a shooting. Where there are some departments that you're going to talk right away. And I actually am not a fan of that. I think that, there's a lot of chemicals going through your body after a
Oh,
shooting. It's better to give the benefit of the doubt and let that person come in willfully, 48 hours later, and have a full debriefing. It's not like you're dealing with a homicide suspect who's going to be on the run. These folks, you know who they
right.
are, you know where to
Exactly. They're
find
not
them.
a flight risk. Yeah.
Correct. Right.
Yeah. Because when the first couple that I had, what happened was they had to give a statement. And okay, say you're working early shift or late shift. The shooting occurs at 2 o'clock in the morning. You're not going home till like 3 or 4 o'clock the next day. And you're tired. Once that adrenaline dump starts wearing off, now you really start, now you're
Yeah, you
hitting rock
crash.
bottom. Yeah, you hit rock bottom hard. And it's an extremely emotional thing. These cops aren't robots, for God's sakes. They're people, and you never know how you're gonna react until it happens. I've seen like big tough guys crying like babies, and I've seen females that are 5'2", 100 pounds being super tough. You don't know until it happens.
I was
And
I was in a shooting in an apartment, and I did not hear my shots go off, nor did I hear the defendant's shots go off. People's
yeah,
bodies react differently. And so I thought it was the strangest thing. And I was told that it's actually a phenomenon called auditory exclusion.
absolutely. Yes.
Never heard of it before. I remember distinctly feeling the spent shells because they bounced. It was in an apartment, like I said. They
Yeah.
bounced off the walls and were hitting me after so I remember the shells hitting me. I remember feeling, I had hair back then, the percussion moved, like literally blowing my hair back because I was
Right.
indoors. But
Yep.
I didn't hear a single shot go off.
Yeah, it's something else. And I'm with you 100% where you need to give these officers or agents a couple of days to decompress. And what eventually would happen is they had to do 3 interviews, 3 separate interviews. You're talking to the DA, you're talking to our internal affairs department, and oh, what was the other internal DA, internal affairs, and there was one more, I forget.
Could be
But
the U.S. Attorney's Office too.
but the problem with that is what would happen is sometimes it's like you'd forget something. Okay, I talked to Pete, he's in the DA's office. I give my statement to Pete. Then I talk to Fred, who was in internal affairs, and it's like, oh shit, I didn't say that one thing. Well, are you lying to us? Well, when
Mhm.
you talk to the DA, you said, now it's all the entities. You don't give separate interviews anymore, which is great. And they give you time to decompress and actually, like be a human being. So, and, get a good night's rest, as good of a night as rest as you could get, that kind of thing. So I'm glad that's going in the right direction. We do require, though, that there's a public safety um, outline that you have to give after a shooting. And that's just, hey, you know what? I stopped this car. The guy jumped out. He started shooting at me. I shot at him. You'll do like a little walkthrough to make sure that, okay, this is what happened. This is where the bullets should be. This is where the casings should be. And hopefully nobody else got hit.
Right.
So, and that makes sense. That makes total sense. And, in the Secret Service, they do have their own ID and it is called inspections. So, getting back to some of the stuff that where the ball was dropped, no coverage on the roof because of the slope. I think that's what Kim Cheadle said, right?
Yeah, that was one of her statements, and then we later found out that that roof has a slight slope, but it's
Yeah.
like it's in essence a flat roof. And
Yes.
ironically, the snipers, the actual snipers, were on a roof that was significantly more sloped. So I mean,
Yes.
her lack of ownership was just completely appalling to me. It just she did not exhibit what I would call leadership by any stretch of the imagination.
Well,
Just
and the one thing
appalling.
that really jumped out to me was, where was she? If you're the head of that organization, this is a historic event. Reagan was back in 81. It's 2024. And obviously, the ball was dropped. Obviously a lot of stuff happened. There's a dead body, for God's sakes. This is a
Mhm.
homicide investigation. Other people are shot. A former president who is the in the running to be president is shot, and you're not on the first plane to get down there and offer moral support to your agents. It means a lot when the boss shows up to something like that, because those
Yeah,
agents are frazzled. That's a huge, huge deal. To see your boss come in, you're like, okay, she cares about us.
right.
It's like that's a good feeling, because almost every shooting, going back to the ones that, I was in charge of or was in, what? Almost 9 out of 10 times the chief of police was going to be there. And not to yell at you, not to berate you, not to, whatever. It's like, hey, I'm here. I want to make sure that all the bases are covered. And this is a good investigation. So yeah, that was a yeah, many of the things that she dropped that was an obvious lie, I
Yeah.
think.
Oh yeah, I agree. I agree.
Then the shooter was seen with a rangefinder 18 minutes before the shooting. I don't think there's a golf course nearby where you would need a rangefinder. This is what we call a clue in law enforcement. I don't know what happened with that. Did you hear?
no, they saw it and they just decided that they wanted to give the benefit of the doubt. I agree. Rangefinders could be mistaken for a telescope or a pair of binoculars or something. But certainly suspicious enough that they should have done something. I mean, the fact that he was allowed to remain free to move around that area for
Yes.
so long, to me, is just it's beyond confusing. It's appalling. I mean,
Yes.
it was just the ball was dropped in a way here that I don't know
And
if it'll ever be beaten, man. It was bad.
yeah, I mean, I could see having binoculars. That makes sense to me. Or like a little telescope or binoculars, but a rangefinder, that's,
Right.
you're specifically like looking for a target.
Yeah.
There's no getting around that. Oh boy. So there wasn't enough Secret Service agents for this event. That's obvious. They were understaffed. They did the best with what they had. And again, I think it comes down to, excuse me, leadership, which was almost non-existent here. But I will go to Trump is about 6'3", 250 pounds, maybe a little chunkier. He's a big guy. And having an agent there half his size isn't practical for when the shit starts to fly, which it did. Sorry, but facts are facts. At the point of the protectee getting struck by gunfire, the agents are more or less glorified meat shields. You see the big, like, it almost looks like a rugby scrum. Everybody jumps on top of the protectee, and they're there for that. They become bullet sponges. And I'm 5'9". There's no way I think I would be adequate, because the protectee is 6'3". I should be at least as tall or taller than that person. Sorry, that's just the way it is.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then also, as far as physicality of the agents, you have to be able to you have to be able to carry said protectee if they're shot and they're incapacitated. You have to be able to, like, carry this 6'3", 250-ish pound person, while all this stuff is going on. And what if one of your partners goes down? What if they get shot? You have to be able to carry them too, or at least drag them. And from what I saw, it wasn't looking good. Some of those agents would have no problem. Other agents, there's no way they'd be able to. Looking at this video, it was obvious that most of the female agents were panicking or scared. That it's just what I saw from being in these types of situations where bullets are flying and people are running and people are shot. That's what I saw. This is probably the only time these agents have been around live gunfire. You know what? The first time, if you're a cop in a bigger city, you're around live gunfire. We actually have listening devices for gunfire. We're chasing gunfire like all night long and during the day too. It doesn't stop. So you get to a point where you almost become inoculated by it. You're not comfortable around it, but you're like, oh, okay, you're not going to panic. Like you'll be safe, as safe as you can, but you don't panic. And from what I saw there was agents panicking and there was agents doing their jobs. That were very professional and doing what they're supposed to do. So either you get some street time in or you get inoculated with stress during training. So you respond out of reflex. So not to bag on the female Secret Service agents, but they didn't know if they should have their guns out or not. I mean, once he got to the suburban, it was should I my gun out? Should I not have my gun out? And unfortunately, there was that one Secret Service agent that couldn't holster her weapon. You could tell that she just wasn't used to it. She wasn't used to wearing those clothes and that holster. It was very obvious to me. It was a very foreign thing to her. And again, she could have been investigating a Ponzi scheme the day before. And you go qualify with your gun every now and then, but once the shit's flying, it's a totally different world. Totally different. So I thought it was embarrassing or playing with their sunglasses or whatever. It wasn't a good look. It really wasn't. And just a little hint, if you think you should have your gun out, you should have your gun out. It's really simple. It's like, okay, there was one shooter that was taken down. They didn't know if there was any more. There was no clear cut. It's like, oh, who? Okay, there's no more threat. You don't know that. There could be multiple threats. And you just can't. So the escape route, the egress was ridiculous. I don't know if you looked at that, but that jumped out at me too. There should be a clear egress out of that area. And it should be balls to the wall. That who's ever driving that Suburban should have that puppy floored and you're out of there. And that didn't happen. Did you take a look at that?
Yeah, no, it was clumsy. It was clumsy when they tackled him. They got to him quickly, with the exception of one young lady who was a little bit
Yeah,
lackadaisical. But look, I think what happens is, and my understanding is was his protective team. So this isn't like, investigators that one day would be pulled
oh
off
really?
something to, yeah.
Oh God.
So, and my
Okay.
understanding is that
I
he
was
is
cutting him some
actually,
slack.
yeah, he's actually very close to the team. So he wasn't as critical as some of us are from the law enforcement world, frankly. He was grateful. But look, I think complacency is a big thing that we got to take into account here too. They've moved him around so many times when nothing has happened. So
Sure.
you let your guard down, and then here the shit hits the fan. So it's like it took probably a few split seconds for them to even realize, holy shit, he's being shot at. But yeah, it was clumsy. The young lady who couldn't holster her weapon is taking a beating on social media.
She is. She is. And I feel bad
You know,
about that.
so do I. So right. But I mean, look, the reality is, Secret Service is so understaffed right now. They are, the training, and this, when budgets go to crap, what's the first thing that goes out the window? It's
Training.
training. And when you're not out there, to your point earlier, when you're not out there getting the reps in, then that's not effective. I mean, that's when things start to go sideways, because you build your skills and abilities by repeating the same motions
Right.
and practicing different things. So I mean, again, when you want to talk at failures, I would say that there's probably some training failures that we can highlight here. We already spoke of the communication failures. As far as getting him out of there, I agree. I mean, if you've ever seen something like this happen in the past, and not just with a president, but with any protectee, it's scoop and go.
Oh yeah.
And now what I learned, because I was like, why are they laying on him? Like, well, get him the hell out of there. Is those buntings are actually ballistic. They're protected. So while he was down on the ground and they were assessing him for wounds, he was covered from projectiles while he was behind that red, white, and blue bunting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, but then it took him a while to get down the stairs. And to your point, some of the agents were too short, so where parts of him were exposed.
Right.
And then once they got him to the vehicle, there seemed to be this delay. The back door is open. Do we
Yeah.
stand here? Do we not stand here? Do we get him in? Should we holster up? Should we keep our guns out? So it looked bad, and it wasn't very smooth. And hopefully they'll never make that mistake again.
But again, nothing like this happened since 1981.
Right.
So
That's why
again,
that's why I bring up the complacency. I
yes,
mean, it's like, all right, so here we go again. Here we go
yep,
again. And just like, I hate to say this, because car stops are among the most dangerous things that cops do, but we've seen it happen again and
Oh
again.
God, yeah.
He does enough car stops and then he just walks up to the car thinking, okay, just another red light. And now he's at the other end of a gun barrel and perhaps shot or worse. So,
Yep.
similar dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. If again, if you don't have the reps, training is important and it has to be good training. It has to be good quality and you have to have your reps. And obviously, that's not happening right now. And that's very, very sad. So, all right. So also one more thing I wanted to talk about was the balancing act of the Secret Service of physically protecting the president and protecting their dignity. There is that balancing act. You don't want to make a president look bad. You don't want him to make him look weak in any way. And I think they did a good job of that. And just, yeah. And also, there's, not to go off on a tangent, but, there's been shenanigans through, in history, President Kennedy, he was a big time womanizer, and so was Clinton.
Mhm.
You can't tell me that the Secret Service didn't know what's going on and didn't help facilitate any of this.
Yeah. No, look, there's a longstanding tradition that the Secret Service keeps the secrets. That's not why they're called that, obviously.
Right.
They keep the secrets of the president and the first lady and try to maintain as much dignity.
Yeah.
It's really to protect the office because when you see presidents doing really stupid things like we have seen, um, then it obviously gives the country a bad look, but it also gives the presidency a bad look, not just that
Yeah.
particular president.
Right. Exactly. So, do you have anything else to add to what happened there with uh with
On
that
the
attempt?
scene, no, on the scene, look, it was
Yeah.
bad. It was bad. I mean, they dropped the ball. They dropped the ball, not just a little bit, they dropped it a lot. I found it to be difficult to watch. And look, again, to your point, I am not a Secret Service agent. Their job is not an easy job. I've
Nope.
worked with them. I was very close with the Secret Service special agent in charge for Miami while I was in charge of the Miami office. I mean, we were colleagues. And so I've seen the planning because he covered Mar-a-Lago at the time.
Mm.
I mean, the planning for each of these moves is painstaking. What's the nearest hospital? What's the nearest
Yep.
trauma center? Where can we land a helicopter? If we have to drive it and bring them into a secure building somewhere, what building can we grab? I mean, there's all of these things that go into each and every move. So the work that they do is tedious and it's not exciting work. Like to the general public, they think, oh, that's cool. You get to hang out with the president and wear sunglasses and an earpiece. But the reality is they don't really get to hang out with anybody. They're there to protect
Right.
that person. And the things that they have to do to facilitate that protection are boring. I mean, I talked to one Secret Service agent because I hired a bunch of former Secret Service agents when I was at ATF. And then when you joke around with them, like, hey, what'd you do? Yeah, I guarded the stairwell. I got tired
Yeah.
of I got tired of staring at hotel room doors because while the president's traveling, when he's out and shaking hands and kissing babies, somebody's guarding his hotel room. So you're
Yep.
standing there like in front of a door,
Yep.
sometimes for 6, 7, 8 hours. And so it's not an easy job. It's not a glamorous job. And right now it's a job where they're having the same problems as other law enforcement organizations, and that's hiring the right people. And once you hire them, retaining the right people.
Yeah.
It's
Absolutely.
challenging.
So how to fix the Secret Service? I have a couple of ideas here. So my ideas are have the agents go to Milwaukee, Chicago, Detroit, work some night shifts or any shift really. It's like Army trauma surgeons going to the ERs in these cities, going to level 1 trauma centers. So what do they learn? They learn how to work on trauma cases. They learn, a lot of gunshot victims. If you're going to combat, what are you going to be working on? A lot of gunshot victims. So they get their reps in a big city. Why don't we do that with the cops? It's again, you have a Secret Service agent that, if they've never been in law enforcement before, from what I understand, you're hiring a bunch of college grads, which I'm perfectly okay with because you have to be able to communicate. There are some attributes that are important, but there's zero street time and they don't have those reps. They need to be out at 2 o'clock in the morning in a squad car chasing somebody that's got a gun, go through a dark alley, go to some situation where it's really hairy. It's the only way to learn. And you learn, and this too. You worked in New York as a cop. You know, you really start to get to know yourself too.
Yes.
It's not just, your other cops is like, oh, so this is how I'm going to react. All right. I didn't think I'd do that. Or, okay, I thought I would, but whatever.
Right.
So that's one way of fixing it. And I also want to get into the congressional hearings. You know, I know you have experience, and that's one of the reasons why I asked you, Pete. You've been in the hot seat. And I was watching these congressional hearings, and there's so much grandstanding by these people asking the questions. It becomes nauseating. What's your take on the hearings, Pete? You've been
Well,
there.
look, when I sat through the hearings in Operation Fast and Furious, which was back, in fact, it's still on C-SPAN if anybody's curious. Um, the politicians that sit there ask you a lot of questions. That's just to get their 5 minute talking point to put on YouTube.
Yep.
Largely political. Some ask questions that want to get to the root of the problem and come up with solutions. I found that the hearing that Kim Cheadle sat in was incredibly frustrating to watch. And I found that her successor wasn't really that much better, in my opinion. He came across as kind of a blowhard, towing a company line. He did own some of the mistakes, and to me, that's the big thing. Like um if you watch the hearings, you'll see there's a lot of finger pointing. Well, the
Yeah, there sure
locals
is. Yeah, because
the locals did this. Well, the thing
yes,
is,
yes.
the locals are working for you, and if you ask them to guard this or guard that, you need to ensure that first of all that they know what they're doing and that they have the resources there, and second that they showed up. So the fact that that roof wasn't covered, well, that was the locals' job. Well, did you verify that they actually were there? Did they know what that meant? And the other thing, well, we work with these police departments all the time. Yeah, that's great, but police departments have turnover just like everybody else. So you might work with the same department, but that department you're working with, the people that are there, boots on the ground, could be completely different people because the folks you worked with last time retired, promoted, moved to a different unit. So I mean, that's the problem. So that lack of ownership at both hearings troubled me. I mean, far more so with Kim Cheadle's testimony, but I'm not impressed with either. And to your point, we talk about fixing the Secret Service. It needs to get fixed because I mean, it protects the most important man in the world. And I don't
Right.
care what your politics are. The presidency is something we should all care about. And if you don't like the person sitting in the chair now, 4 years from now or whenever the next election cycle is, hopefully you'll get somebody that you like. But yeah, I don't know what the fix is. I know that their investigative mission is duplicated by other agencies. But
Yes.
look, the federal duplication is another thing I just absolutely despise. Like, I was an ATF agent. We handled firearms, arson, and explosives, as long as it wasn't terrorism. If it was terrorism, it was the Bureau. But I've seen FBI work straight up arson cases, straight up
Sure.
gun cases
Yep.
without communicating with us. They work straight up drug cases without talking to DEA. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that can be fixed within federal government holistically. And I think Secret Service, if they're as strapped as they say they are, they should pass off some of their investigative missions to other entities that already do it, because there are other people out there working financial crimes. I think the
Right.
only one,
Absolutely.
the only one that I know they don't share with anybody else is counterfeiting. But in today's day and age, I don't know how much counterfeiting is really happening because so many folks use, debit card. I mean, there's not a lot of money being passed around anyway. I know it's a thing; it still exists, but is it at the same level that it
It's
was
not.
20
It's
years ago?
not
No, of
because
course not.
my last couple of years, I've been retired now for going on 5 years, and you could see it tapering off because the paper money that's out there is sophisticated. You
Mhm.
can it's hard to duplicate with those holograms, and yeah, it's tough to duplicate to make counterfeit, and we're going to a cashless society.
Right.
I asked the same question to some of my buddies that are working in law enforcement right now, and they're like few and far between, almost zero.
You know
So
where
the
the best
counter,
count, you know where the best counterfeit comes from?
where?
Paraguay.
Really?
Yeah, that's the,
Paraguay.
the 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 best counterfeiters currently. I mean, it might probably move but from what I'm told from Secret Service guys, I have plenty of Secret Service friends. Paraguay is where the best counterfeit money is made in the country of Paraguay, believe it or
I
not.
wonder why. Huh.
Yeah, I have no idea.
That's interesting. But let's dig into a little bit about director Kimberly Cheadle. Yeah, she was a Secret Service agent for 25 years. She was one of Biden's agents. Of course, that's the way it works in local law enforcement as well. Nepotism is king. It rules at the top. Nobody should be shocked by this. You have your favorites. Sometimes it's warranted. It's like, hey, you know what? That Pete guy knows his stuff. I worked with him. I've seen what he's done firsthand. You know what? There's a spot open here. Absolutely. I want Pete to be my guy. And that's what, Biden did with Cheadle. So in 2023, Cheadle told CBS News the agency needed to, quote, attract diverse candidates and give opportunities to everybody in the workforce, particularly women, outlining her goal that by 2030, 30% of the recruits would be female. I don't care if they're female, if they're male, or if they're whatever. They just have to be able to do the job. And what bothers me or troubles me is everybody in the workforce, everybody, not everybody is a physically or mentally able to do this job. Not everybody can pass the backgrounds, and it has to be the backgrounds for Secret Service are very stringent, and they should be for God's sakes.
Right. Right. Well, I actually heard something different. I heard that it wasn't Joe Biden that was thrilled head over heels with Kim Cheadle. It was Jill Biden, Dr. Jill.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah.
same
Now,
difference, right?
yes. So, but and it makes me wonder who's been calling the shots for a while anyway. When you see some of
Yeah,
them. But the other thing is with that 30 by 30, there's a movement afoot in law enforcement. So I don't want to put this squarely on Kim Cheadle because former acting director of ATF Regina Lombardo went down this path, and I've heard this preached at IACP, which is the International Association of Chiefs of Police. I used to be on one of the boards there. I heard it preached at PERF, the Police Executive Research Forum. That's something that started outside and was adopted by many law enforcement groups. But to your point, I mean, look, if I wouldn't care if 80% of my agency was female, if they're the right females,
right.
to recruit people just because they fall into any category, I think is wrong. You should hire people because they're the most talented people for that position. But it's to defend her in this instance, and you will not hear me defend Kim Cheadle for anything else. Well, actually, I'll take that back. Yeah, that 30 by 30 is something that she bought
Okay.
into that was sold across federal law enforcement, state and local law enforcement, perhaps even internationally. The one thing I will say at the first hearing, the Democrat side kept trying to bait her because the shooter had an AR-15 and they tried to turn it into an assault weapons thing. And what I will say is she was sharp enough to identify, hey, this is a really hyper political question, and I'm not going to take the bait. But other than that, the answers to the questions were so evasive or vague or just bold-faced lies that
Right.
that she really lost my respect entirely, as not just as a director, but as a former law enforcement officer. And that's I usually try to give former cops, the benefit of the doubt. But yeah, she basically lost all my respect after her testimony.
Yeah, it was definitely the blame game, and it was nauseating, watching it, like you said, and I was sitting there with my wife, and when it happened, I said, well, I hope, she resigns or gets fired. And my wife is like, well, she wasn't there. I said, you don't understand leadership in law enforcement. It's like that's your mess up. If something, you're the one who put these people in place to do these things, and you expect that, and you should, hold them accountable. And the
Well,
the biggest accountability is the one at the top.
I want to go a step further. All right, you look at this whole mess. Where was Alejandro Mayorkas? I mean, he runs the Department of Homeland Security. He's
Yeah,
Cheadle's boss. And then after the second attempt, where was Alejandro Mayorkas? And then look at what's happening at the border. And I mean, that's one of the areas that I speak about very frequently because of the cartel work that I did back in the day. I still have an interest in the Mexican border.
sure.
Um, Abysmal failure. Where's the accountability for him in all three of these instances? I mean, he basically was missing in action during all of this. And leadership, to your point, starts at the top. And
It
that's the
does.
thing. Look, I've made plenty of mistakes in my law enforcement career, and I'm a lot of them. And when asked about them, I never, ever, and even in my book, I wrote about some of the mistakes I made when I was a group supervisor in Phoenix. You own it. You say,
Yep.
hey, this is what I tried to do. Here's where we wound up, and then this is how I'm going to fix it. I mean, we don't expect perfection in law enforcement. We know it's staffed by human beings make mistakes. But because we want to continue to be a respected profession, when we make a mistake, we need to be clear about what happened and clear about what our intent was. Because if you're acting in good faith, I think most people will forgive you. And look, every time I made a mistake, some of them were, important mistakes that had repercussions. I always landed on my feet because I owned them and took responsibility for them. And each time the boss dusted me off, got me back on my feet, and got me back into the game. Where had I started to humma, put up, give excuses or lie, then my career would have not ended the way it ended. It would have been a completely different picture, and my reputation wouldn't be what it is now. Look, I always tell people, going towards the end of my career, when I rose into management and eventually towards the higher end of ATF, I was to say the only thing you leave this profession with is your reputation.
Yes.
You don't get to keep anything else. So protect it for all it's worth, and just the importance of having character and admitting when you make a mistake.
Yeah, I mean, I remember one morning, I was working day shift and my lieutenant's like, "Hey, Pat, the captain's not happy with you or your guys." And I'm like, "Okay." He wants you in his office like in 5 minutes. I'm like, "Okay." So I go in there and he starts screaming and roaring about two of my guys that were on a special car. I was in charge of the special cars. I forgot what the investigation was or whatever, and I'm like, "Totally my fault, sir." And he says, "You weren't working yesterday." So it doesn't matter. It's totally my fault. Those are my guys. I handpicked them. I trained them. I manage them. Whatever the problem was, I said, "Okay, yeah, it's on me. I will take care of the situation. And if you're not happy with it, get rid of me." It's
Right.
really simple.
That's
And it
leadership.
and it totally popped his balloon. He was just like, "Oh, okay." He wasn't a very good leader at
But
all.
I bet you he respected you after that, though.
He did. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. instead of saying, "Oh, it was Pete, it was Susie, it was Jane, it was the man on the moon," and that's what Cheadle was doing, and it's like
Right.
horrible, horrible leadership. But I did feel bad for her being in there because after a while it just becomes a circus. Like you said, these, politicians want their 5 seconds of, fame. And I'm just watching this and I felt bad for her as a human being. It's like, God, it's like, really, you could do this without all the bravado. This is
Yeah.
just, it's just getting silly. It reminded me a lot of Comstat, on steroids.
Yeah.
It's like, I've been to a ton of briefings. I've had to go to Comstat, and it devolves into stump the dummy. And you can see who the
Yeah.
good leaders are and who isn't. And the questions, yes, there were questions she should have had answers to. And I do believe she was deceitful.
Yes.
What,
Glaringly.
yes, you know, again, I circle back to, why didn't she get her butt on an airplane and get to that crime scene? Obviously, that was an active crime scene for how long? It had to have been probably at least a month. They're going to hold that and dissect it and analyze it, and because the FBI was in charge of the crime scene itself, I believe, the investigation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And the
So
FBI, their evidence collection teams move
you're right.
at a glacial pace.
Oh yeah. I mean, you can't rush anything like that. Everything gets slowed down to just, okay, we're going to do it right. And that's the way it should be done.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was glaring that she was a horrible, horrible leader, and she shouldn't have had that job in the first place if that's how she's acting. So then,
Correct.
effective July 23rd, Ronald Rowe got the job as acting director of the Secret Service. He has an impressive pedigree. I was looking at it, but and he was also a cop before he was a Fed. But from what you were telling me, he's not. It doesn't look like he's a ray of sunshine.
Well, he's kind of a blowhard, is what I've
Okay,
been told. It doesn't mean he was a bad agent.
right.
And look, I think he's done a better job at owning a lot of what went wrong with the shooting, the first one. And he did a pretty decent job describing the second incident. But I, I still detected a little bit of finger pointing,
Oh,
and
okay.
and so again, way better than Cheadle. But
Yes.
I just wasn't super impressed with his briefings. Like I said, he kind of reminds me of Mark Milley in some ways. He's there. He wants to own the room. He's kind of like I said, a little bit of a blowhard.
Yeah.
But yeah, just a little
Well,
disappointed.
well,
But he's
hopefully he'll be good for the Secret Service. Hopefully,
yeah. Look, those agents deserve leadership.
they do.
And look, the agency needs to get put back on its feet. They go through a rough time. ATF went through a rough time after the Fast and Furious, and we came out of it better. So I'm hoping that he could, or if he gets replaced, that his successor could initiate the right reforms to bring the agency back to the prestige that it needs. Look, if you're protecting the president, you need to have a prestigious, squared away agency. But they're suffering from the same thing that every police organization in the country is suffering from, and that is the people on the hard left have demonized law enforcement to the point where it's no longer a sought after profession anymore. I took the test to become a New York City cop back in 1980, no, 83, with 60,000 other people.
Oh yeah.
Now they can't get 2,500 people to take that test. And it's because the law enforcement is no longer viewed the way it was. And it's largely because of politicians who have an agenda, who don't give a shit about public safety, just trying to get their talking points in and portraying the profession as racist or heavy handed or somehow the one I laugh at is somehow derived from the old slave patrols. I mean, that's the most pathetic one I've heard. When the reality is policing had nothing to do with slave patrols. Policing existed in England back in the days of Sir Robert Peel. And
Right.
it's insanity. But there are people who watch these various news organizations and listen to this and say, "Yep, oh yeah, it must be true." If a politician is saying it, or this newscaster is saying it, it must be true. And it's going to take a long time for the profession to get past a lot of the shade that was cast upon it by people who were just full of shit.
Well, I feel it's a pendulum and slowly it's coming back. It's not coming back as quickly as it should,
Right.
but I think it's still coming back. But to what you were saying, I took the test, oh boy, in 92, 93, and there was close to 3,000 people there for maybe 200, 300 jobs. And it was a huge, it's like, oh my God, you're probably not going to get it. The competition was insane. It was
Well,
really, really hard.
New York used to hire like 2,000 cops a year. I was in a class of 1,200, and we had like an overlapping class of 1,200. So it wasn't
Right.
as competitive as some of the smaller organizations around the country. So, but
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah, it
sixty
just,
60,000.
that's crazy. But yeah, our numbers are way, way down. But, hopefully, again, having the right candidates for that job, and you cannot, I didn't plan on talking about this, but I will real quickly. You can't sacrifice your standards because of this.
Correct.
Because, then all of a sudden it's like, I can't believe this cop did X, Y, or Z. I do, because that's what you hired.
Yeah.
This is what you asked for. This is what you get. Yeah, and unfortunately, that's what happens. So, talking to agents that are retired, active, they're describing it as a sinking ship. And boy, people understand, again, their numbers are down and they get bounced literally all over the country. These agents, it's like, hey, you know what? Trump or Biden or whoever is going to be in Colorado tomorrow or in a week. You got to go, a couple of days ahead of time and do all that tedious work and whatever. And you're missing time with your family.
Right.
During an election cycle, it's crazy.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and look, going back to what I was saying earlier, to bring the prestige back to that agency, because their mission is so critically important. Like in federal law enforcement, all agencies are in the general schedule, and the pay is pretty
Yeah.
much the same. There are some exceptions, like the Federal Reserve has investigators. They're different banding. They also have some better perks when they travel.
Okay.
But the if they had to attract the right people to sit in that again because it's a monotonous, boring
Yep.
job until it's not. If they had to pay them more, for example, I don't think the American taxpayer would care as long as they had the best people in that job protecting the president, because they also protect the vice president, former presidents. They also protect visiting heads of state. So I mean, the Secret Service's mission is in protection is beyond just the first family and former first families. But to have the best people doing it, what's the old saying? Good work isn't cheap, and cheap work isn't good.
Yep, absolutely.
So,
So
yeah.
here's my, I hate being that person that's just complaining about stuff. We have offered some suggestions, and one more that's drastic would be to disband the Secret Service, have the marshals take over protection, and the FBI take over financial crimes. The FBI is already doing the same financial crimes that the Secret Service is, except for counterfeiting. And counterfeiting really isn't that big of a thing anymore. They could easily absorb that. And you have agents that Okay, they're sitting in an office doing, financial crime stuff, and they're good at it and they want to do it. That's their forte. God bless them. Go out and do it. That job has to get done with cyber stuff and all that. I mean, it's critical. It's a big, big deal. Have them do it. And then if you're protection, okay, you should just be protection. If
Right.
that's your bag, we've all known cops. It's like, hey, you know what? I love doing traffic. Oh, you'd be a great motorcycle cop. I love writing tickets. I love doing traffic. Or I love going out and getting guns. I love chasing bad guys with guns. Great. You can welcome to the gang squad. Welcome to, whatever. And everybody has their like little niche when it comes to that. And that's what should be done with that. And again, you went over it before. We're having redundancies. We're having federal agencies that are all doing the same thing. And that doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
No. And they trample over each other doing it too. I mean,
Yep,
this is kind of a well-kept secret is that you have organizations where, they're supposed to deconflict, but sometimes they don't.
they don't.
And
Yep,
it gets sloppy, and it's not what the taxpayer really expects of their various federal organizations.
yep. All right. Well, we have some Facebook questions. Let's go over to Facebook. All righty. Quite a few. Wow. All right. From Juliet Banks. The actions we saw during the first assassination look so different from what we expect, maybe from TV. I thought they'd dive on him. It seems slower or less urgent. What that for was that for a reason? I don't think they were too slow to dive on him. I mean, what do you think?
Oh, I thought they got to him rather quickly because don't
I
forget
thought so too.
he's on a stage. They're not, so they got to get up there on him. And look, I mean, we're human. I'm sure when those shots go off, there was that brief, what the, you know what?
Is this
You
really
had to like
happening?
come,
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean,
I
yeah, I thought they were pretty good at getting on top of him. I again, plenty of failures before that. And I thought they were clumsy getting him to the limo. Once they realized he
yeah.
wasn't bleeding, that he was okay, he was ambulatory. I think that was slower than what would have been optimal.
Yes, I think so too. But I think for the circumstances and everything else, they did a great job. His shoes, who cares? Yeah, I mean, Trump was worrying about, you know what, you can afford more shoes, sir. Yeah, yeah, that's the last thing we should be worrying about. And they should have just, if you've seen like when Reagan got shot, he almost broke another rib from getting pushed into the limo.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like,
Yeah.
sorry, it's like you have to, again, you're trying to preserve the president's dignity or the protectee's dignity, but your first thing is preserving their life. So that's what it boils down to. Good question. Douglas Klapsick. Pete knows his stuff. As far as squirrels go, they done messed up. Oh boy. Uh Juliet Banks. Also, where did they take him? If this was a sitting president, what would happen if he or she was incapacitated, if the vice suddenly is in charge? And I would assume they took him to the hospital. There's going to, what do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, they when they have these operational plans, they know exactly
Oh
which
yeah,
hospital they're going to go to. But it's not. It's like they'll have two. One is like if he needs stitches on his hand because he cut himself,
or
they
where's
may
the
take him
level
to
one trauma center? Yeah.
right if it's a serious wound. And then like if it's something super serious, where they need to medevac them, where's the landing zone where we're going to have the
Yep.
helicopter come in and move. So I mean, they have all that stuff planned out in advance.
Yeah.
You know.
Absolutely. All right. Let's see here. Julie Banks. Is the shot always intended to the shooter or just disarm, truthfully? Richard Rybecki answered that for us. I can answer the question. No law enforcement, local, state, or federal shoots to wound or disarm. That's TV nonsense.
Stop. Stop the
Yeah,
threat. And you
you
usually
stop.
shoot center mass because it's the biggest part of the body. There's no
Right.
shooting in the hand to get the
No.
gun knocked out of the hand or shooting him in the knee. Because when you're shitting your pants, you aim for the biggest part of the body, and that's
Yeah.
taught all over the country.
Oh yeah, that's because that moves the less, like arms and whatever, that moves around. And the last thing you want to do is shoot, you're trying to shoot a gun out of somebody's hand and you shoot the guy behind him. That has nothing to do with that.
Right.
Nothing. That's what we have to worry about.
Right.
So let's see here. Carrie Belfast Street. I remember reading a Secret Service agent memoir, but he confirmed agents shoot to kill, not injure. They don't want to give the assassin time to shoot again. Again, it's not shoot to kill, it's shoot to stop the threat. Now, is will the person most likely die if you shoot him, 5 times in the chest? Probably. But you're there to stop the threat. So let's see here. LSK Papa, she was asking about you in Operation Fast and Furious. Let's see. Marquis Bartolotis, who was on the show, she's a former NYPD copper. And there's Pete with his book. There we go.
Yeah, that's where you hear the whole story about what Fast and Furious, the deadly path.
So where did Marquis asks, where did the second shooter get the money to buy the firearm? By
That's a good question. Where did he get the money to buy 6 phones? Where did he get the money to
yeah.
travel internationally? Here's a guy who
Yeah, he's
was
from Hawaii, right? He was living
correct,
in
but I mean,
Hawaii.
he was living in North Carolina, went to Hawaii to go work for was it Office of Emergency Management, building those little sheds for people who
Yes.
were displaced. So
Hmm.
I mean, he was living on a shoestring budget. So I mean, those are the questions that I think need to be asked, and hopefully that's what the FBI is looking at now. Is because I mean, the old adage, and there's a lot of truth to it. Is follow the money,
Oh, absolutely.
but yeah, but he had 6 phones. Apparently, he had map coordinates and directions on the best ways to get into Mexico from the United States. So I mean,
Yes, he did. Yeah.
he had an escape plan. But that sharp-eyed lady that took photos of his license because
Yep.
he also had other license plates in the car.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yes. So had he gotten out of sight, like had he gotten further away enough, he would have switched out those plates. He
Yeah.
probably would have never been caught. But yeah, I mean, the credit goes to that sharp-eyed woman who said, "Hey, something doesn't look right with this guy,"
Right.
and then rolled up behind him and took pictures of his license plate. That's what got him caught. So I mean,
Wow.
how many people were involved and how far the tentacles go into God knows what? Who knows? And
Yeah.
look, he did travel to Ukraine. He met with people of
Yes.
prominence in Ukraine. Who knows if he was paid by someone abroad to come here and do this? They certainly picked the wrong guy. The guy doesn't look like he's
Oh,
squared
he lived.
away.
Yeah. If I was going to hire an assassin, that'd be like one of the last guys I'd hire. Yeah. I mean, you could tell this guy, he wasn't playing with a full deck,
Yeah.
obviously.
But I can't wait to see what they uncover. I mean, if they'll
Yep.
tell us, because that's the other thing lately. The government doesn't seem to share a lot of information, which is
Right.
frustrating at times. But
It can be.
yeah, we'll
Yeah.
see.
We'll see is right. Let's see. Why was there no media in the spot when there's usually media? And how did the shooter identify that location as a good setup? Well, either it was luck or it was planning. Maybe it was both. He was 400 to 500 yards away, which is a fair amount. Trump was never, I don't think, like in direct line
No,
sight.
and golf courses aren't flat.
Right.
You have bunkers, you have sand traps. So I mean, he look with that rifle. 400 yards is a tough shot.
It
Going
is.
back to the first shooting, 120 yards with a AR-15, a child could have made that shot.
Oh, even I can. When we were lucky enough to get long guns about midway through my career. We got, M4s, the Smith and Wesson patrol rifles. And we started with EOTechs, then we went to red dots. And those are not magnification. It just helps you aim, more or less. And I went through the training. It was a 4-day training, shot way over 1,000 rounds with the rifle and probably about 600 with the pistol for transition. We were outside, we were inside. They put us through the paces, and it was the most fun I ever had for training. And we
Yeah,
had
yeah.
and we had metal targets, and you had to shoot the metal targets from 100 yards with iron sights, which means they're like the old-fashioned peep sights. And I was hitting it every time. And I'm not, like super awesome like shooter guy or anything like that. I'm no sniper, but I could do it fairly consistently. Now, if I had like some big fancy like scope on there, oh shit, that's easy. That that doesn't take a whole lot. So let's see. Why did the Secret Service not check the lockdown of the perimeter prior to Trump being on the course?
They dropped the ball.
Yeah, I mean, somewhere again, complacency or they just didn't have enough people. And I would not doubt that in the least. So that's that. Good questions, Marie. All right, Sterling Kirkland. How about how do you fix a problem when it boils down to human error? I'm sure the easy answer is leadership and training. That is pretty much the answer. But there's a ton of components when it comes to protecting someone. So I'm guessing it's going to be more complex than that.
Well, a couple things I'll say. Training is important. Again, getting the reps in, hiring the right people, the most
Yes.
qualified people is important. The other thing is, and this is something I experience in government, is when you do have the actual bad employee, the person who's just a bad fit, or their behavior is so outside of the norms that they do stupid things, and it's not mistakes made in good faith. It's just somebody who's bad. It is incredibly difficult to fire a federal employee. And it's because the same people in Congress who like to yell at people for not firing someone when they're not having those discussions write employment laws that make it almost impossible to fire someone. So yeah, it's very complicated.
Yeah. Then Corey Lanuski asks, what was going on? What was going on was a lack of security procedures in place, a director on location with little training in field operations at this level, and employees of the president willingly doing a poor job. Glad he's alive, but those employees should be fired. I'm not going to agree with that. I think that especially with the first, because I don't know enough about the second one, but the first one, the boots on the ground, the agents that were doing the protection, they're doing God's work. They're literally, all those agents were putting their lives on the line. They're doing the best they could with what they had. Now, there obviously some balls were being dropped, and I think that's at a higher level. But the agents themselves that were there, God bless them. I think they did the best for the circumstance that they were in.
I would agree.
Yep. All right. Ted Pilcher. Why isn't there a height requirement and physical fitness qualification in place for Secret Service members? That isn't what I saw when reviewing the videos.
Lawyers, that's why. Well,
Yeah.
before I retired from the New York City Police Department, they actually hired I don't know if it's the appropriate term, a very short person, clinically back then was called a midget. And it was because they sued and got the job. So a lot of the things that we see in law enforcement now, where you see people who normally wouldn't have had that job in the past, came out of the Americans with Disabilities Act. In fact, we were forced to hire people at ATF who were deaf, who, as long as they could restore their hearing with a cochlear implant or something like
Oh,
that to a
okay.
certain level. So that stuff happens all the time where people sue. And look, the reality is if they're good for the job, I mean, if you're deaf and you're just out there kicking ass, I'm happy to have you. I mean, if you couldn't pass the eyesight test and you go get LASIK or one of the other corrective measures
Right.
and your eyes are fine, hey, as long as you're there capable of doing the job, happy to have you. I never worked with that little person in New York. They could have been the best cop that ever wore an
Who knows?
NYPD uniform.
Yeah.
Exactly. But a lot of that stuff is derived from lawsuits and the ADA.
Yeah, because before my time and yours, there was height and weight requirements for police officers. Like you couldn't be under like 5'5" or
Well,
5'6" or whatever it was.
NYPD was 5'9" back in the 70s.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, I would barely squeak in. I'd be on my tippy toes, like
You, you would be both.
yeah, and I understand what Ted is saying here because of the agents that were there, and they were the female agents, they were smaller. And
Mhm.
again, Trump is 6'3", he says 250. I think he might be pushing a little bit more. And to have agents that are smaller than that is just silly. It's sorry, because part of your job is A, to be that meat shield to like cover the president or whoever, and B, you have to carry them out. And if you're unable to do that, then you shouldn't be in protection. It's really that simple. It's very cut and dry that way.
Right.
So yeah, that's yeah, good question. Physical requirements when you get hired, there's, a PT test for almost every police department. Now, there are PT tests for the Secret Service that they have to complete. I don't know if it's once a year or twice a year, somewhere in that ballpark, just like they have to qualify with their weapons. You have to qualify. And from what I hear, that is kind of going by the wayside. which is obvious looking at some of these agents. I mean, you don't have to be, a cover fitness model, if it, from Muscles and Fitness or whatever, but you should be able to do your job. And obviously, some of these people, you look at them and you're like, there's no way. It's like, no. And again, part of it is, it's okay, in order to be physically fit, you have to work out. Well, are you going to pay me to go work out? Okay, you want me on a plane tomorrow to go to Idaho to do this, like the president's coming, in a week from now. Okay, I'm doing all that stuff. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Hey, you know what? This just kicked off. I have to have you go over there. Oh, and by the way, in 3 days you got a PT test and and have a life outside of work. That's not easy. So
Yeah,
if you want these stringent, qualifications and standards, again, it all comes back to money. You got to be willing to pay them.
exactly.
That's what it boils down to. All right. Let's see. And that's it for the Facebook questions. Good questions, guys. All right. Let me get back here. All right. So I think in conclusion, something has to be done. And it has to be done soon. We can't be resting on our laurels. We can't is like, well, you know what? Nothing happened, since 1981. Oops, now we have two things that happened. I don't see it going away anytime soon. If there's enough people who are mentally ill that have this like delusion that they're on some kind of like mission or whatever, there's plenty out there, and it's
Yeah.
scary, and
Well, scarier is the fact that, look, it's no secret. Donald Trump dropped a bomb on Soleimani, who was the head of the Quds Force, right? Which was the basically the people who trained and funded terrorists around the world,
right.
and they have sworn vengeance. So far, we've had two amateurs try to kill Trump. But what would have happened had it been members who were
Yeah, that's
trained? I mean, that's the thing. Why, yes, we need to get our act together because next time it might not be some moron who decided to buy a gun and go out and try to kill the current nominee. It could be somebody who's been training and practicing for many, many years to carry out a mission like this on behalf of a foreign actor.
Yeah, absolutely. What we have to remember here is there's no second place trophy here. This is pass fail. Either whoever you're protecting gets off that stage and goes on to their next whatever in a safe, way, and they're not harmed, then you did your job right. If they're shot or, or hurt in some other way, then you failed. It's that simple. You have to own it and you have to do something to fix it. So I think that's where I'm going to stop here. Do you have anything else to add, Pete?
No, it was good being here with you. Hopefully, folks took something meaningful away from our discussion.
I
We don't
hope
have all
so.
the answers, but we got some, right?
Yeah, I think we do. And again, from your lens and my lens, I'll go back to, I could tell when I was working with federal agents, not just Secret Service, but other agencies that were cops before they were agents.
Yeah.
Just the way they stood, just, you're kind of in a dangerous situation, how they reacted, where their gun was, or where they were facing, it was as obvious as the nose on your face to me,
Yeah, I
so
agree.
something's got to be done about it. All right. Well, thank you everybody for being here today and listening to all this. Pete, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Hey, if they want to find out more about Fast and Furious, your book, do you have a website?
Yeah, I actually, well, it's on Amazon, but they can also order it at it's www.peterjforcelli, it's FORCELLI.com. So peterjforcelli.com
All right.
or Amazon.
Outstanding. All right.
Perfect.
Thank you, Pete. It's always great to have you on the show. Thank you, everybody, for listening today.